Hello everyone, thanks for checking out the channel. If you like this video, please remember to like, and if you subscribe, be sure to comment below. I reply to every comment. The days following the snowstorm were filled with a fragile sense of unity, as our combined group worked to strengthen our defenses and scavenge for supplies. The strangers who had sought refuge with us had slowly integrated into our routines, sharing the burden of survival. But as the weeks passed, tensions began to simmer beneath the surface, threatening to fracture the fragile bonds that had formed. It was a seemingly insignificant incident that sparked the first flicker of discord. Supplies had grown scarce, and the pressure of living in such close quarters was taking its toll on everyone's patience. One evening, an argument escalated into a heated exchange between one of the newcomers and a member of our original group. I watched as voices were raised and accusations flew, the room growing tense with hostility. Mark and Jack attempted to mediate, their voices calm but firm. But the damage was done. A rift had formed, and the trust that had been painstakingly built was now threatened. As the argument escalated, the sense of unease was palpable. It was then that a loud crash from outside shattered the growing tension. We rushed to the windows, our eyes widening in horror as we witnessed the cause of the commotion. The argument had drawn the attention of the undead. Undead figures emerged from the shadows, their numbers growing rapidly as they converged on the building. Panic spread through our ranks as we realized the gravity of the situation. The noise had attracted a mob of hungry, relentless undead, and they were closing in on our refuge. "We need to secure the barricades," Jack's voice rang out, snapping us into action. Weapons were grabbed and furniture was hastily pushed against the doors and windows. Adrenaline surged through our veins as we fought to fortify our defenses. But the undead were relentless, their moans a haunting chorus that echoed through the air. The sound was like a siren's call, drawing more of the undead to the scene. Our makeshift barricades strained under the force of their relentless onslaught. Amidst the chaos, the argument that had ignited the confrontation seemed insignificant. Survival was now the only goal, as we fought desperately to hold back the horde that pressed against our defenses. Lily's terrified gaze met mine, and I could see the fear in her eyes. This was a battle unlike any we had faced before, a battle against not only the undead, but also the very divisions that threatened to tear us apart. The apartment became a battleground, a symphony of groans, gunshots, and the clash of weapons against the figures that moved with a macabre purpose. We fought with a desperation born of survival, each strike and shot a reminder of the stakes that had been raised by the arrival of the mob. As the minutes stretched into an eternity, it became clear that our defenses were failing. The barricades splintered under the force of the undead, their insatiable hunger driving them forward. Our weapons grew heavy in our hands as fatigue set in, our movements becoming slower and more labored. It was then that a realization struck me. The strangers who had become part of our group were fighting alongside us. The rift that had divided us was now irrelevant in the face of the shared threat. In this moment, survival was the common thread that bound us together. With renewed determination, we fought back against the horde, our collective efforts finally stemming the tide of the figures that moved relentlessly. The survivors' resilience shone through, and even in the midst of chaos, a sense of unity emerged. As the last of the figures fell to the ground, the room was filled with the heavy silence of victory. We were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but we were still standing. The apartment was in shambles, the aftermath of the battle a stark reminder of the dangers that surrounded us. With a mixture of exhaustion and relief, we looked around at each other. The strangers who had once been seen as unwelcome guests were now part of our collective struggle. The fight had tested our bonds, but it had also reinforced the truth that survival was possible only through cooperation and trust. As we caught our breath, we knew that the challenges ahead were far from over. The city remained a perilous landscape, and the undead were an ever-present threat. But in the wake of the battle, a new understanding had emerged. That unity was our greatest weapon, and the bonds we had forged were the key to enduring the relentless nightmare that had become our reality. The city had become a battleground, its streets marred by the remnants of its former glory. Our group of survivors had weathered countless trials, united by the common goal of survival. As the days turned into weeks, a growing sense of urgency hung in the air. The undead horde was relentless, and our resources were dwindling. We gathered in the dimly lit apartment, our faces reflecting a mix of weariness and determination. The tension was palpable as we discussed our options, weighing the risks and rewards of every possible course of action. Jack's voice was resolute as he addressed the group. "We can't stay here indefinitely," he said, his gaze sweeping over each of us. "The city's resources are running out, and the undead are closing in. We need to find a way out." The weight of his words settled over us, a reminder that the battle for survival had reached a critical juncture. It was then that Mark spoke up, his voice carrying a mixture of determination and desperation. "There's a way to signal for help," he said, his eyes meeting ours with a glimmer of hope. "There's a radio tower on top of a partially destroyed skyscraper. If we can get there and send out a distress signal, maybe someone will come." The idea of rescue was a spark of light in the darkness that had become our reality. We agreed that it was worth the risk, that anything was better than remaining trapped in a city overrun by the undead. The decision was made. We would make our way to the radio tower and send out a signal in a final bid for salvation. The journey through the city was treacherous, the undead a constant threat as we moved cautiously through the ruins. The streets were littered with debris, the remnants of buildings serving as grim reminders of the world that had been lost. Our group moved as a tightly knit unit, our senses alert for any sign of danger. Finally, we reached the partially destroyed skyscraper, its skeletal frame a stark contrast to the surrounding destruction. With weapons at the ready, we began the ascent, climbing higher and higher as the wind howled around us. The tower was unstable, its structure a precarious reminder of the world's downfall. At last, we reached the top, the radio equipment a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. Mark worked quickly, his fingers flying over the buttons as he attempted to establish a connection. The tension was palpable as we waited, the static-filled silence a reminder of the uncertainty that hung in the air. And then, a crackling voice broke through the static, a voice of hope and salvation. The military had received our distress signal and was mobilizing forces to enter the city and combat the undead threat. Relief washed over us, a sense of renewal in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. But as we descended from the tower, the sky above us darkened with an ominous promise. The horizon was streaked with trails of smoke, and the distant roar of engines filled the air. The military was not just entering the city. They were launching a bombing run, a desperate attempt to stem the tide of the undead horde. Fear and uncertainty gripped us as we raced through the ruins, our footsteps echoing our desperation. Mark's expression was a mixture of determination and despair as we reached a vantage point overlooking the city. The skyline was lit by the fiery descent of bombs, the destructive force of humanity's last-ditch effort to reclaim the city. As we watched in horror, the ground trembled beneath us, and a deafening roar filled the air. The bombing run was underway, and the city was being consumed by destruction. The undead horde was caught in the chaos, their figures engulfed by the flames that swept through the streets. Mark stood on the edge of the building, his eyes fixed on the devastation below. The city that had once been a symbol of life and progress was now a wasteland of destruction. The military's intervention was a desperate measure, a reminder that survival came at a staggering cost. And then, as the smoke and fire began to clear, a glimmer of hope emerged. The undead horde had been significantly weakened by the bombing. Their relentless advance finally halted. The city's streets were littered with the remains of the fallen, and the survivors who had managed to endure were emerging from their hiding places. As the smoke cleared, Mark turned to face us, his expression a mixture of determination and resolve. The military was entering the city, and the battle against the undead was far from over. But amidst the destruction and chaos, a new chapter had begun, a chapter of defiance, unity, and the unwavering will to reclaim a world consumed by darkness.